This reading is from Rays of the One Light by Swami Kriyananda, which these are parallel commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. This one is entitled for Palm Sunday, Who is this Son of Man? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. On Palm Sunday, the throng joyfully acclaimed Jesus Christ as he entered Jerusalem, casting palm fronds before him and singing, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, and Lord bless the King of Israel. Jesus Christ had told the people, the Son of Man must be lifted up. His reference, so we are told, was to the mode of his impending crucifixion. Some persons on that occasion had asked, Who is this Son of Man? Was Jesus a human being merely? Those who, on Palm Sunday, called him King, little realized the actual nature of his kingdom. He was far more than what they imagined. Yes, of course, he ate, drank, walked, slept, and talked like others. His consciousness, however, was centered in infinity. Yes, again, he laughed like others, but his laughter expressed divine joy, not mere merriment. Again, he wept like them, but never with human grief. The tears he shed were for the sufferings of unenlightened human beings. Never were they shed in self-pity. Jesus Christ was wakeful in God. Most people, by contrast, are asleep spiritually. How strange to reflect that less than a week from that entry into Jerusalem, so joyfully acclaimed, he would be arrested, condemned, and crucified. Such is the bittersweetness of human existence. Smiles of welcome one day, insults, even persecution the next. How few realize that Christ's suffering would not be for himself, but for people's ignorance, for those who had not yet understood the deeper reality that dwelt also in them. Everyone is born trailing clouds of glory, as the poet Wordsworth put it. Even the meanest beggar has lived a story, or will eventually have lived it, more magnificent than the greatest epic ever written. In the Bhagavad Gita, this dichotomy between the Son of Man and the inner Son of God is beautifully described. Sri Krishna, representing God in human form, reveals his true nature in infinity. In the 11th chapter of that great scripture, his chief disciple Arjuna exclaims, O infinite light, thy radiance, spreading o'er the universe, shines in the very darkest abyss. Thy voice o'erwhelms the roar of cosmic cataclysms. Lo, the myriad stars are thy diadem. Thy scepter radiates power everywhere. O immortal Brahman, Lord of all, again and again at thy feet of infinity I lie in prostration before thee. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Good morning, everyone. So nice to see you. As I said earlier, this is a holy week in honor of Christ as our avatar, one of our avatars, one of our gurus in our line of gurus. And this is a special time to tune into his vibration, tune into his blessings. During these types of sacred times, this is when the veil is thinner between ourselves and the astral, between ourselves and the divine. And so there's a lot of opportunity to tune in during this time and feel God's presence even more closely. There's a special grace that flows through to allow this. So, let's see, where will I start? So, Christ, there were many, many prophecies, hundreds of years, and in some cases, some say thousands of years, before Christ was born, that were to anticipate his birth and his life. They say things like, how he'll be born. They say how he'll die. They say how he'll be brought into the hands of cruel people. There's just a lot of these types of prophecies that happened. And the Jewish religion, it's part of the Jewish religion, these prophecies. And they're located in the Old Testament of the Bible. It's the Bible has this Old Testament that the Jews use, and then the New Testament that the Christians use. And so these two testaments are stuck together and create this Bible. So the Jews grew up, every Jew would grow up knowing what those prophecies were. And so then Christ's life came about, and all these things became true. And some recognized that and thought it was great. Some recognized it and weren't sure, couldn't feel it. And some recognized it and wanted to kill him. And this was actually early on. This was not just some decision that happened in this last week, which is kind of when it's described this week, which I will describe, it's usually you suddenly think, oh, he's being irritating now, and so the high priests want to kill him. So what you find out, though, when you read more of the scripture, is that, first of all, he's only 33 when he enters the city of Jerusalem, and then has this 1 week before he is then killed. Now, he had been to Jerusalem before. The whole area of Israel has this kind of center part called Galilee. And Galilee was where he wandered about, and kind of in the south part was where he was born. And then he would wander around and, preach the gospel, preach basically the inner light that God is within, all these things. And Jerusalem was about 80 miles north of Nazareth, at least, and the Galilee area. So he would wander around there, and of course, he started doing miracles, and he was known even as a child to go in and kind of argue down the rabbis of the temple with inherent wisdom that he already had, that he was hearing from God. So he was like Master. Master would go, in Autobiography of a Yogi, Master very much does not quite tell the whole story according to Swamiji and his disciples. He acts as though he's the spiritual seeker. In actuality, in many cases, all these saints knew he was a saint as well. And, he was a young little saint, a young little avatar who could perform miracles also. And so anyway, there is some similarity going on there. So Christ was this way also. Doing these miracles, people knew he had a specialness about him. And those who could see and feel knew what was going on. And those who couldn't didn't understand. And in fact, Master wrote, Christ spoke about Kriya Yoga. He gave initiation to his disciples. He talked about the inner light. He talked about God is within. He talked about discipleship. He talked about all these things with his disciples. But then this is a very interesting wording. To the general public, he spoke in parables to awaken the truth in the public. Awaken the truth, because he came during a very dark time in the Yuga system. According to Sri Yukteswarji, Kali Yuga ended, in 1700 AD. And so according to some modern systems, they say we're still in Kali Yuga, but if you read the Holy Science or take one of our classes on the Yugas, you can understand where this path is coming from on the Yuga system. So during the lowest time in human history is Kali Yuga. That's when people are the most material-minded. And it corresponds to astronomy, that the Earth is farthest away from the center of the galaxy at that time. And so anyway, now we're in Dwapara, we're closer to the center of the galaxy. So this, and it's not only that, it's at descending Kali Yuga. Now, the inflection point of Kali Yuga, when it goes from descending to ascending, is about 500 AD. So Christ is at, about 0 to 33 or something like that. Or sometimes they say he's born at 3 or 4. They're not sure the exact time. And so that's, nearly 500 years before this inflection point. So what's going on there? Also, Buddha is born around that time. Some great saints are born around that time. What's going on? Avatars are born in order to create a big change in consciousness in humans. And so at some point, Kali Yuga has to become ascending, and human consciousness has to raise. Human consciousness has to get ready. So these great people were born beforehand to try and help change the consciousness to bring up the Yuga up, so that then we can get to Dwapara. So anyway, that's kind of the big picture view. Why would Christ be born? How does he fit in? So back to the high priests of the Jewish religion, they saw him in his younger years, from whatever age, and they knew his birth was miraculous. That also fulfilled one of the prophecies. So they were keeping track. He was Jewish. All these guys were keeping track. It was a small area. 80 miles is not that much. Small area. Everybody knew. Everybody was aware that this strange child, teenager, young adult, was performing miracles and kind of upturning the apple cart. Meaning, he was kind of saying, you're stuck in Kali Yuga. And I have new ways of thinking about this that are from God, not me. It's not me that's saying we're all children of God. It's not me saying I am the son of God. It's God saying that. It's not me saying, we can attain union with God. That's what God tells us. So the high priests were hearing this, and they're under Roman rule. And under Roman rule, the Jews, it was very iffy, because the Romans want to make sure they get their money from everybody they're ruling over. And they also want to just have dominance over. And if Christ were to be really given the power that he had, the priests were afraid he would break up the religion and they would lose Israel. And that the Romans would just say, forget it, you guys don't get a country anymore. So this is long before he entered his week before he's going to die. And then not only that, so the Pharisees say, we should kill him. It's better to kill one man than lose a whole nation. So they're really entrenched in their old way. And there's all these layers of politics around the whole thing also. And so that's just some of the background of what's going on to all of this. So Christ hears these not quite so subtle rumors about him being killed, and it says he then decides to kind of withdraw a little bit and preach elsewhere. So he's kind of away, and then he says, you know, my death will not come in before its time. So he knows he's going to die. He knows, and not only that, he knows his death is prophesied. And so he's aware of all of this. And the disciples are a mixed bag. Some are more in tune with him than others. And, you know, it's Kali Yuga. It's kind of hard to be in tune. But there's still, you know, these saints that are going through this process with him. So it's finally time. It's finally time for him to go to Jerusalem. And Jerusalem had a reputation at that time to kill prophets. So he's going in there, and what was that quote you said this morning? When he entered Jerusalem and stood on the mountain.
He said he stood on a hill overlooking Jerusalem before going in and said, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that stonest the prophets, and curses those who would help you. How often I would, like a mother hen, gather her chicks and bring you basically to safety, but you would not, meaning you would not come. But that line, thou that stonest the prophets, the city that stonest the prophets.
So stonest the prophets, you know, basically it's a materialistic city. It's materialistic minded. It doesn't understand in general, you know, it's fast paced, it's a big city. There's big business to be had. There's money to be had. The Romans have dominance over everything. So, okay, this is how it goes. And he's going in and going to make great waves because he's going to be right there with the high priests. He's going to be right there in the temples. He's going to be right there. And he knows it. But his disciples don't necessarily know it. So can you imagine? Put yourself in that time. We're following Yogananda or Swamiji. You know, do. Little do we know, a week later, something tragic is going to happen. It would just be very heart-wrenching. It does go along with the time of Kali Yuga. It's a cruel time. Death was, you know, off with their head, that kind of a thing, throwing people to the lions, all sorts of things, much cruder in the way people lived. Filth, people lived in filth, people lived, you know, all sorts of, tons of poverty, just unrefinement, just a time when consciousness is lower. So, okay, I think I'll go in there then. So now he's getting ready to go to Jerusalem. And we have this Palm Sunday, which is today. So that's Sunday. Palm Sunday, he enters Jerusalem, and they're putting palm fronds in front of him. And in a way, the palm is similar to the banana tree. The palm tree is like a tree of life in the Middle East. And so, like one would do with banana leaves, they're doing with palm leaves. And so they're laying that, and he goes in on a donkey as a symbol of humility and of peace. Now, why would he do that if he didn't know he was going to be ill-received by others who would perceive him coming to Jerusalem as threatening? So, you know, he's kind of like, no, I'm coming as peace. And the crowd is just like, yay, we've heard of this guy. He does miracles. Maybe he'll do a miracle for me. There's stories of people just touching his cloak and having a miracle happen, all sorts of things. So the crowd is going wild while he's going in. He is almost protected by a crowd. Meanwhile, the priests are like, we can't kill him yet because the crowd is happy with him. And if we killed him, we would create a riot. So, not yet. This is 1 week. What changes? So, I thought this is kind of an interesting thing. I'll just give an overview of the week, okay? Sunday, he rides into Jerusalem. This is like an itinerary. Monday, he disrupts the temple and is breaking a lot of rules at the temple, and I'll go into that just a little bit. Tuesday, he's still breaking rules at the temple. Wednesday, the priest still decide not to do anything because there's a crowd around him still. Not only that, even at the temple, they're saying not yet because the crowd is going to, protect him and they'll riot still. Then what's interesting is also during this time, they keep trying to send in little spies into the temple to challenge him on his knowledge of Scripture, but also challenge him on the things he's saying to try to make him say something wrong that will make the crowds then hate him. And he does, in a way, finally say, we are sons of God. I'm a son of God. You can be a son of God. And that finally says, wait a minute, you're saying you're God. You are committing blasphemy. And so forget it. Now, this isn't the main crowd necessarily. He still has many, many followers. But those that are on the fence, I guess, say, wait a minute, this isn't right. Also, so let's go back to the temple. This is where politics comes in also. So he goes in materialistic city. Inside the temple are vendor places. People buying, selling and buying things, gambling, basically a den of ill repute, just really not great things happening on sacred ground. And so Christ walks into the temple and destroys everybody's, business and says, this is a holy place, get out. So he's making the vendors mad. He's making the Romans mad. He's making everybody mad because he's, kind of breaking tradition, whether it's ancient tradition or capitalistic tradition, he's breaking it. So he then kind of takes up residency in the temple. So that makes the priests really mad because he's getting all this attention, plus he's preaching things they know are true, but he's too much of a threat and going to split the religion too much. And so despite the fact that they're aware of his miracles, believe that he's actually doing real miracles, it's happening in front of their face, they know he's very spiritual, and too bad. That's not as important as politics. And who knows how he would be received today. So he's then in the temple. This is where they start sending scribes and other priests going in. And so then finally the priests kind of also help raise this disturbance around claiming he's God. And in fact, they're confronting him and he says, I didn't say it, you said it. So he's fanning the flames a bit. He knows what the prophecy says about his death. He knows this. As an avatar, you know that death is just walking through a veil, no different on this side than from that side. And very often the Christian religion will make a big thing that he suffered Master said there was no suffering there. His heart suffered for those who were just so disgusting towards him, but he had no bodily suffering. He was a master. He was an avatar. So that kind of suffering, he suffered for us on the cross. It's not a true teaching in according to Master. And so anyway, that's Wednesday, Tuesday and Wednesday. Now on Thursday, he says, Thursday is Passover. Passover is a tradition of the Jews that started back in Moses' day. So 1,600 years before that. For 1,600 years, their tradition has been to have Passover. So it's an ancient religion. So in Passover, it's a special kind of meal they prepare. And so he says, okay, my disciples, come. And this is where the 12 disciples gather and they have conversations and things like that. And so one thing that happens before the supper is the priests now say the crowds are against him. Some of them are quite against him, not so many people. So perhaps the wave is coming in our direction. And then it says, and Judas, who is one of his disciples, Satan got into him. And he decided that he went to the high priest and wanted to betray him. Now, what Master has said is, yes, he had an attachment to money, and he also had an opinion about how Christ's PR should be. That maybe Christ would be more effective if he did not raise so many hairs on people's necks. You know, if he just didn't do it quite as much as he's doing it. If he just, could rein it in a little bit, he could, really take advantage of this situation and really kind of maybe do more than he realizes. Of course, Judas doesn't know about what's going to happen just in terms of who Christ is. So if Satan comes to us, we've all had situations where we've suddenly gotten in a really dark mood and can't get out of it, and we just are believing in the material reality more than we feel the presence of God. Everybody has that happen. So Judas had that happen. And so he took 30 pieces of silver for agreeing to betray. So he was going to give a signal after the Last Supper. It wasn't called the Last Supper then because they didn't know. But it's called the Last Supper now because we know. So although he did hint. So during this Last Supper, he said quite a few things that the disciples did not understand because, he was telling these truths, and he was also saying, Judas, he didn't say Judas, but he said, the person at this table is going to betray me. And they're like, who? Who could it be? Who could it be? And then they start arguing about, well, I'm a really good disciple. Well, I'm a better disciple, so I wouldn't be the one who did it, and I wouldn't be the one who did it. And that's where Christ says a famous line, a famous quote of, he who is the least is the greatest. And so, because their ego was like, no, I do more for him. No, I worship him more. And so then at some point, Christ looks at Judas and says, go and do it. And Judas is, first of all, he's very shocked that Christ knows he's about to do something. And then Christ tells him to go do it. very powerful when an avatar has control of the whole situation. He is not a victim in this situation. So he also tells Peter, who is a very good disciple, once I'm arrested or once I'm taken away, maybe he doesn't say that, but he does say, you're going to betray me in a way, you're going to deny me 3 times. And then after you deny me the 3rd time, a cock is going to crow. And Peter's like, no, I can't imagine that happening. So then, what else did I want to mention about that situation? Okay. There's another disciple, and he says, what would you do if basically something bad happened to me? And that disciple said, I would face death with you. And so they're all like, no, if something happens, no, I'm with you. Yeah, of course. But we're all, everybody's human, and they're going to have their own responses. So let me just make sure. Okay. So dinner is over, or supper. Now, in some cultures, supper is lunchtime. I don't know about this. So, okay, because a lot of things happen that night after supper. So they go out into the garden, and they're talking, and Christ kind of moves away, and he prays. And this is where he also says his famous line, Lord, if it's thy will, let this cup pass me. Lord, let this cup pass from me. And so, meaning, I know what's about to happen, but if possible, can it not happen? But then he says, but thy will be done. So he accepts his destiny from God, but he says, what if maybe this didn't have to happen? And you can maybe say it's a last-minute doubt, but, once you're an avatar, Master had these human moments also, So who knows? We weren't there at the time. So then he joins the group, and then Judas has this signal to the high priests to say everything's ready, which is to kiss Jesus. And so I don't know if he actually kisses him. Maybe in some of the other chapters he kisses, but in the one chapter I was reading, before he gets to kiss Christ, Christ says, Judas, I know what's going on here. And then the priests come in, and then the disciples are like, we're going to defend him. And one pulls out a sword and cuts off the ear of, a servant of one of the priests. And Christ picks it up and heals it. And so even in the face of a miracle being done, they still arrest him. This is heavy Kali Yuga. I'm not so sure if a miracle happened today like that in Dwapara Yuga, if maybe a little more respect would be given. At least in India it would. In India, I would assume that it would. If it weren't in too materialistic of a city or something, But even Mumbai is very devotional. We've gone there and done workshops. So anyway, I would say at least in India he would survive. So they take him away. This is where some really bad Kali Yuga stuff happens in terms of beating and very icky details that are there about what happens to him after that. And those are the things that are kind of the downer about the story. It's part of what has sometimes made me avoid talking about the subject, but I became so intrigued about this 1-week itinerary that so much dramaticness happened. I mean, this is hugely dramatic. And visualize yourself as a disciple witnessing this. So they take Jesus into this house where they're questioning him, and Peter kind of, some of the disciples kind of distance themselves. So Peter kind of distances himself. But then these people come up to him, 3. Aren't you one of them? Aren't you one of those who are with him? He says, no, I don't even know the guy. No. And then 2 more people do the same. No, I don't know him. No, please don't kill me. No. And then the cock crew. And he went, But he was in the same house as Christ. So he kind of looked up over at Christ, and Christ looked right at him. Like, guess what? Did you hear that? You know, in a way, it is sweet. First of all, Christ didn't say, you're going to do that, so get out of here. He said, you're going to do that, and that's going to happen. In a way, it deepens one's faith. After you have to get through the guilt of having it done it. They said, then he wept. Then Peter wept, knowing he had done wrong in terms of denying Christ. I mean, that would be a heavy karma. But he then created a church, that kind of thing afterwards, probably made up for everything. A church that still survives to this day, even if it is, as Master would say, churchianity, as opposed to true Christianity. Churchianity is how Christianity kind of developed into how it is today. Not its whole philosophy or basis, but kind of the political organization. Let's put it that way. Okay, so then more beating, more horrible things, getting him to the crucifixion, carrying his own cross, you know, all sorts of things, and miracles happening in front of everybody. No. Even though a miracle is happening, you still have to die. We don't believe something. We saw it happen, but we're still going to kill you. I mean, it's because it's all politics. We can't lose our nation. One man has to die for the whole nation. So he then is crucified, and Master, in fact, said, you know, we've started giving higher kriyas here now. Master said one of the higher kriyas Christ did at the end when he left his body. And so, very interesting that he did this. And so a rich, wealthy man begged for Christ's body. Of course, all his disciples had to witness that. This is just horrific. How do you even recover after that? And so, but then again, hanging people on cross was the way. They killed everybody back then. That was their, what's it called? Punishment, you know, corporal punishment. No. What is it when you have the death penalty? Anyway, that's their death penalty. Everybody had that. And so a rich man said, please let me have his body. Even actually, after they took his body, before they took his body down and they took his clothes, they say that the guards cast lots, meaning they gambled for his clothes. And that's even in the prophecy, that would happen. So all these things that will convince some, but not others, because he fulfilled these prophecies. So a rich man takes his body, gives him a high funeral, basically, and puts him in a mausoleum type thing, a stone, and puts a stone in front of it. And then 2 days later, they call it the third day, but the first day is counted. Disciples start coming and see that the rock is moved aside. This is when Christ then shows, I'm resurrected. Look, I have a body still, because like Sri Yukteswar on the train station platform appeared. And Christians wrongly said, well, only one guy has ever done this in history, but, Hindu religion knows that it happens. It happens. It is. And so anyway, that was one of the wrong ways they took that. But anyway, his message then in this deeply Kali Yuga time is that, look, the body is not the reality. It's the spirit. It's the union with God. We are beyond our body. This is a really strange concept for people in Kali Yuga, because everything is so materially bound to earth. So he's ushering in this new consciousness that's going to become and take us into Dwapara Yuga sooner or later. He's really saying Dwapara Yuga principles. He's saying timeless spiritual principles, but this is what's happening. So I'm going to leave the resurrection and more of his coming to life story for next week, which is Easter. So Easter is, I talked about how, I should say this is interesting. So Thursday is the Last Supper. He is questioned and he's put on trial by the Jewish priests and sentenced to death by them. But they can't legally do it. So they take him to the Roman governor in charge named Pilate, Pontius Pilate. Pilate says, first of all, his wife had a dream that said, don't go near this. And I don't know if the dream came the first time or before the second time he saw him. But she warned him. She said, do not go near this. I had a dream. He's a true person, and do not go near this. It's going to be trouble. And he ended up having a very bad death. So, but I don't know when that was. Okay, so Pilate then said, I don't see this man having done anything wrong, but there's a huge crowd saying, kill him. And he says, I don't see anything wrong with this man. So then he thinks, you know what? Herod is the one really in charge of the area where Christ has been doing the most damage. So I'm going to send him to Herod. And Herod had heard of all his miracles and everything, but Christ wouldn't do. Herod said, perform the miracles for me and I'll let you off. And Christ wouldn't do that. And so obviously Judas would have been actually Judas left his body. He hung himself after he betrayed Christ. He realized what he had done. Satan had kind of left, and it was like, oh my gosh, I didn't mean for this to happen. I just thought he'd be arrested, and then maybe he would learn his lesson, and then be released, and not create so many waves, but it didn't go that way. So anyway, he went to Herod. Herod then said, I don't see anything wrong. Go back to Pilate. And so then Pilate 2 or 3 times again said, I don't see anything wrong with this man. And the crowd was saying, crucify him, crucify him. I don't see anything wrong, but he was kind of beaten down. And he had to go with popular demand at that point. And the high priests were pressuring him. Everyone was pressuring him. So he finally said, okay, so be it. And that's when getting the cross on his back and then going up the hill and getting crucified happened. So that's an interesting story that his wife had the dream. And Herod is actually the son of the King Herod that had killed John the Baptist, which we really didn't bring into the story, but that was Jesus's guru. And so he was killed by Herod's father. And they're of the line, he was called Herod the Great. You know, was Herod the one? Oh, okay, and King Herod, in the prophecy that said there's going to be a new Messiah that comes, Herod had heard this and was afraid that this Messiah was going to replace him. Herod the Great, which is the father of this Herod that said, go back to Pilate. So he then heard, it's this year that that all these babies are going to be born that are going to take my place as king. And so I'm going to just kill all the newborn babies. And Jesus's parents happened to be able to leave town, or what did they do? Did they have the lamb? No. Well, their parents left town and avoided it. So they were able to avoid this massacre, similar to Krishna. It's interesting how these stories have these parallels. So anyway, I wanted to kind of give this background. It's a very dramatic story. It's a very interesting story to tune in. And I'll kind of end, I probably should have started with, it has a happy ending. Because the happy ending really is, Christ and Babaji met and said, more Kriya Yoga to everybody. And now we have him here on the altar, and here we all are also. Next Sunday, we're going to have a meditation from 9 to 11, and then celebrate Easter, but also Swamiji's moksha. So please do come to that, but during that meditation, you can tune in yourself and kind of see, or tune in this week. It's not, it's not necessary to feel this way, but it's kind of interesting if it's a way. I grew up in a country where Christ was talked about so much, and I remember as a teenager just rejecting it all, saying, this just doesn't feel true. People are preaching this thing and they don't even follow what they preach. And I was in church at the time when I had decided this, and I broke down crying, I don't know why, and kind of became an agnostic, not an atheist, but it was the beginning of my spiritual journey on this. And so anyway, try to tune into Christ this week. Try and tune into his life. He created a big splash, but he had to create a big energy during Kali Yuga to help mankind's consciousness really be raised at that time. And the other avatars that lived during that time were also doing this. So, and then not only that, Kali Yuga was at its worst 500 years later. That's when Kali Yuga was at its lowest. So all that energy had to survive the lowest part of Kali Yuga. And perhaps he had to come at that time when people would be a little more open-minded than they would be at the worst time of Kali Yuga, so that somehow it could be carried through. And so, word of mouth, stories, all these kinds of things happened that perhaps kept his story alive through that. And like a guru-disciple relationship, guru-disciple keeps things alive over the years. So try and tune into him. He's one of our avatars. Be open to the vibration. Ask, how can I be more close to you? I love doing that during all the different holidays. Of course, next Sunday, not only the Easter with Christ, but the moksha with Swamiji. It's an opportunity to, if you don't feel you know Swamiji as well, a good time to tune into Swamiji and say, so Swamiji, tell me more, or help me feel your presence more. It's just a time to, I found it very interesting when Swamiji left his body. Was it the day after Easter, or?
Well, Easter was his last talk, and then the next year, which is the same as this year, the first anniversary was on Easter.
Right. Okay, so the first anniversary was on Easter, which I always kind of felt was a little planned. and that because his time is at this time, periodically it will fall on Easter. So here it is again, years later, falling on Easter, 6 years later, after his death, falling on Easter again. So it's a time to get to know Swamiji, time to get to know Christ, time to tune into, was Master Christ? Unofficially. It's not something we write in the brochure. Let's put it that way. It's a little even nervous to say it on a video. We'll see if it makes the cut. And so anyway, God bless you all, and I hope you can feel the presence of Christ within and the Christ consciousness within.